It begins now.
The Resident Evil 4 remake was finally officially revealed to us with a trailer that included gameplay, cinematic footage, and I thought it looked really good. If you haven't yet, you should check out my initial trailer reaction. I did that yesterday, link in the bio and also at the end of this video. I said then and I'm going to say again, I absolutely love Resident Evil 4. It's in my top 2 favorite games of all time. I played it countless times. I'm incredibly hyped, though still hesitant, towards the remake. But in this video, I'm gonna tell you the 5 things that the Resident Evil 4 remake needs to do. And of course, this is just my opinion. So when I say it needs to do, it's more like the top 5 things that I want it to do, but needs to do is just a better sounding title in my opinion. Number 1, it's the most obvious thing, but unfortunately I feel like it's the thing that can be messed up the most. And that is gameplay. I really want the gameplay to feel similar to the original Resident Evil 4. Now, Resident Evil 4 was a groundbreaking game when it came out. A lot of people credit it for popularizing sort of the over-the-shoulder third-person shooter type thing. But every time I replay Resident Evil 4, it feels less and less horror and more leaning towards the action. Where back when I was a child, it scared me. The environment scared me. The game scared me. But whenever I play it as an adult now, it feels more obvious how heavy-handed the action is in that game. And it was the action in that game and the popularity of that game that led to Resident Evil having a really, really strong action phase with games like Resident Evil 5 and obviously Resident Evil 6. So with the Resident Evil 4 remake, I want them to lean gameplay-wise more towards the horror than the original Resident Evil 4 did. When you're going through the village, when you're exploring the locations, the sound design, I want it to feel scary. More scary than the original Resident Evil 4 did. I really want them to still utilize what made the Resident Evil 2 remake so good, that just tense horror. But on top of that, I still want it to be faithful to the original Resident Evil 4 when it comes to the action elements. I want the game to get a bit more action-y as the plot progresses, as you as a character get more skilled, when you find more weapons. I just want the shift to feel gradual, something that Resident Evil Village did incredibly well. Resident Evil Village began very scary, very pure horror, and as it progressed, it felt like it was more actiony, something that a lot of people said was that game mimicking Resident Evil 4, which I agree. I just want this game to feel more horror in the beginning, in the setup, and just have a more gradual shift to the action. But I don't want it to be over-the-top action. I don't want you hiding behind cover. I don't want red barrels everywhere. I just want the action to feel more earned as you progress in the story and as you get more skilled as a character. Anyway, that's my number 1, is the gameplay. I want it to feel horror, more horror than the original did, but I still want it to gradually shift to action as it progresses. Again, very similar to the original Resident Evil 4, but more importantly, more similar to how Village handled it, in my opinion. Number 2, locations. I want the locations to stay the same. I don't want them to cut or get rid of any locations like they did with the Resident Evil 3 remake. I want the village to be there and intact. I want Del Lago's lake to still be there. I want the castle there. I want the mines there. I want the island there. I want everything from the original game to be there, just expanded upon. I want the village to be bigger. I want the castle to feel bigger, more real, more lived in. The original Resident Evil 4 is still one of my favorite games of all time. I still think it's a masterpiece, but the design of the castle feels a bit like a video game. You know what I mean? Like, the castle doesn't really feel believable, like anyone really lives there. It feels like each room is just a fun segment to get through. I hope like the castle feels more real and lived in, kind of like Village. I hope the village feels more real and lived in. I just want them to expand and build upon all the environments that are still there. And I would love it if they included new places to explore, new locations. As long as you don't get rid of anything, I'm willing and open, and I encourage there to be more stuff added. And that's my number 2, locations. Number 3 is plot. How I want them to handle the plot is essentially both ends of the spectrum. I want the core plot to stay the same. I want the main focus and objective of the game to stay the same. I want it to be Leon S. Kennedy being sent to a remote European village to retrieve the president's daughter. I want you to deal with Sadler. I want you to deal with Salazar and Mendez and Krauser and meet Lewis and re-meet Ada along the way. I want all the plot points to stay the same. All the main beats to stay the same. However, I do think plot is a place where this game can get more creative, where it can be elaborated on even more than settings. It would be really cool if they found a way to make Resident Evil 4 connect even more to Resident Evil 2 than the original Resident Evil 4 did. Now, I'm not saying the plot needs to connect, so to speak. I'm not saying William Birkin needs to be involved or Umbrella needs to be directly involved. But if they could have Leon Kennedy as a character and his character development link the two games more than the original did, that would be really, really cool. And it would be especially cool if they could find a way to make Resident Evil 4 maybe connect subtly to the newest game, Resident Evil 8 Village. I think that would be really cool too, because they're both villages with castles somewhere in Europe. And I think that's something cool that the remakes are doing really, really well. I don't think that the remakes necessarily exist in their own separate timeline. I think Capcom is doing something really, really smart where you can just sort of take away the original and replace it with the remake in terms of the plotline. Like, that was something very smart they did with the Resident Evil 2 remake, is having it still take place in the 90s, not making it modern, and not changing the plot in a way that makes it completely disconnect from the games we had beforehand. Like, I feel like you as a lover of Resident Evil, and you as someone who loves the lore, and someone who would want to go in and replay the games, could mix and match in any way and have it still make sense. I think that you could play the original PS1 game and then the 2 remake and then the original 3 game, and the narrative still makes sense. I would love to see the same thing happen for the 4 remake, where again you could theoretically replay through every Resident Evil game and pick and choose which game you want to be in the timeline, whether it be the remake or the original, and have it make sense regardless. Number 4. Now this is a very, very important one. The extras. Keep all the extras intact and maybe even include more extras. When I'm talking about the extras, the Mercenaries mode, I would really, really, really love the Mercenaries mode to return for the Resident Evil 4 remake. It would be a bonus if you include multiplayer mercenaries. But more importantly, the Ada Wong section of the game, Separate Ways, you need to keep that intact. It's very important for her as a character, and it just builds on to the greater narrative of Resident Evil 4. Now, I feel like they could handle this 2 ways. They could have it be a second campaign after the game, or they could just interweave it into the main game and you could get the same effect. Sort of like how in Resident Evil 3 you play as Carlos for a while. Now, I know playing as Carlos was part of the original game too, but you get my point. As long as we get Ada's perspective and we get her levels and her mission and see as the plot is with her involved and behind the scenes, it's going to be fine, I think, regardless, again, if it's played after the fact or just part of the main game. But I would really, really love it if we got even more DLC, even more characters' perspectives in this game. I would love to play as Louis Serra and see his side of the narrative. I would love to play as Jack Krauser. That would be badass. Even playing as Mike. Anyone else remember Mike, the helicopter dude? Playing as him. Small section. That would be incredible. And last, but certainly not least, number 5, keep the scene where Leon throws his knife through Salazar's hand.
So nice you could join us, Mr. Scott Kennedy.
Anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts on what I think the 5 most important things that the Resident Evil 4 remake needs to do. What do you think the game needs to do? What does Capcom need to do to make you think that this is a worthy remake to a game that's already a masterpiece? Let me know in the comments. And of course, subscribe to this channel if you liked this video. I do lots of things on this channel. I usually do trailer reactions, TV show discussions, movie discussions, but I do the occasional Resident Evil thing, video game thing. I'm a huge fan of Resident Evil, so if there's a Resident Evil thing to talk about, I'm going to talk about it. And anyway, thank you for watching. And again, let me know in the comments, what do you want to see from this remake? Because it's a beloved game. The Resident Evil fan base is incredibly dedicated and outspoken, so I'd love to hear from you guys.